Are we? You're live.
Well, how about that?
Hello, YouTube.
I'm pro live.
Lives. Multiple.
Going live matters.
Ahoy.
Well, hi there.
Hi there.
Hi there.
Hi there. How are you today?
Obviously messed up already. Just getting out.
Fresh out the gate.
Well, I was fresh out of the gate, 15 minutes ago when I was sitting in traffic in our one light town. So
that sounds like a country song. Sitting in traffic in a one light town.
All right, that's your challenge.
I don't know where that would go.
You can have
turn into road rage. Have you seen? There's a TikToker and it's called like Christian road rage or something, and this guy has a filter on his face that raises his voice to make him sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks, and there's one where he's sitting in the car and he goes, "How great is our God?" and he goes, "The light's green, God."
Yeah.
Oh, it's good.
Sadly
it's good.
Familiar.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I didn't want to yell into the microphone. So.
Well, it could be a substitute for coffee this morning. As we're going. So.
I didn't have enough, but the Nespresso.
If I'd have gotten moving a little sooner, I thought, I'll just run to Infusco and get Stacy a coffee.
Oh,
this
thanks,
morning.
pal. Where is it?
Don't thank me. It was a complete failure. So.
Well, Speedway doesn't have any food right now, or Bev, because of the water.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the food thing because the sandwiches that they.
Well, they said they have to prepare them and they need like water to do that. IDK.
They're in the wrapper, in the refrigerated section.
Yeah,
not in the heated section.
I don't know.
I don't know a lot of things, but it seems like
they dump water on it before.
I mean,
I don't know.
They still sold me the sandwich. I have it myself.
Oh, they're still selling cold?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, but I don't. Maybe that was from order. I don't know how long.
No one really knows how long we should have been boiling our water, or
how long we will be. I'm not sad to be moved out into the country now and on a well with really hard water, but it's not.
I have hard water here. I have hard water here in town, so you're not. I was telling Heidi the other day, I'm like, I don't love brushing my teeth with like a bottle of water. She's like, it's like you're tent camping, and I'm like, I don't go tent camping, so I don't have to brush my teeth with a bottle of water.
Does Heidi go tent camping?
No, but.
I was going to say, they have a camper.
There are a few things that appeal to me less than tent camping.
I mean, she has been. I know she has been tent camping before.
I mean, these things remind you how grateful you should be for, things like clean water regularly.
Word.
But it's a little frustrating.
And
my son's in the shower and going, I can't drink it. Because he'll usually be in the shower just going, But.
Well, all of these things do, in really, it seems like a real pain in the neck, but in a pretty small way, remind us of folks like in Honduras and places in Africa where you just don't have access to clean water. And so it puts a new perspective or impact on the Vacation Bible School fundraiser we did for that mission. So
if you drink it here, you might get a tummy ache.
Yeah.
And these people are drinking water that have horrible things in it. So
visibly brown, like dirt, mud puddle kind of stuff as the cleanest water that they had access to and some of these things. So
anyway,
never been there, just following what folks are doing to try to help with that. But pretty amazing how just how different the walk is in various places for various people.
For sure. Well, thank you for the thought of coffee.
Yeah, well, my thoughts they're there. They might be scattered, but they're
always there.
But the follow through might be kind of weak. So, that
it's all good.
That can also
there's going to be a coffee shop downtown.
That can also happen in our Christian walk, where we have good intentions, which don't follow through on them. And
whatever do you mean?
Well, I mean, we talk a good game sometimes.
I don't know that my game is that good.
We like to talk about how we love the Lord, sing how great is our God, which is on the docket for Sunday, I believe, as of now, unless it gets bumped in the list.
Wait, are we singing on Sunday? I thought they were dancing.
Yeah, we're only singing some. So.
Oh.
But Imagine Worship is coming. That's for sure.
Really plug.
But the we come to church, we sing songs, we listen to sermons, we talk about obedience and faithfulness and so on. And then we go home and live our lives. And our lives very often don't look like our profession. And that's something that the New Testament's exceedingly clear about. Jesus is very clear about, if you obey my commandments, then you truly are my disciples. This is, if you keep my word, James says, be doers, not just hearers. So it's one thing to hear the word, it's one thing to believe, with my little air quotes. And again, James points out the devil believes. Mm-hmm. Every demon believes that there's one God. Their theology is spot on, but their submission is not, which is, a key part of why God has orchestrated things the way he has. And he's designed the created order the way he has. He has given us a physical, a physical realm that we can see in the cosmos, the concepts of authority and submission and orderliness throughout, all throughout creation. And all of it is pointing to our relationship to God, mm-hmm. that he is sovereign, he is supreme, he is the giver, we are the receivers, and we are to surrender to him just as a reflection of his character and his glory. And in that same way, he's designed marriage, sexuality, and family to reflect that as an illustration, as a way of glorifying his own name, of helping us to understand him better, to instruct us and to bear witness to the unbelieving world of what he is like and what it means to follow him. And so when we get marriage, sexuality, and family wrong, as we've said so often, we ultimately blaspheme God. But we cannot be walking with God rightly. We can't claim to be following him if we're doing marriage our own way, mm-hmm. which is kind of what Peter's getting at. Paul does the same thing in Ephesians 5, but as we look at 1 Peter 3, 1-7 for the second week in a row, and there's so many more things I wanted to bring out that we just don't have the time to cover because we'll never get through this very short letter. It's really necessary for Peter to say, look, if we're going to live as aliens and strangers in this world, I chuckle because of a comment I got from my son I'll come back to. But if we're going to live as aliens and strangers in this world, then that has to show up in every part of us, right? Mm-hmm. It can't just be we talk about this. There's a hair on the microphone.
There's a hair on the microphone.
Another country song. So, but it has to be throughout our whole lives. And so, when he's talking about we reflect the reality of Christ in our Christ-like humility and submission, that shows up in how we handle governing authorities. Pretty significant in an election year, talking about how we respect authority as a reflection of our submission to God.
Difficult.
How we handle this, even in their case, literally slaves and masters. Right. We're not in that situation in our context, but there are slaves around the world today. Mm-hmm. I don't know if to my knowledge, it's not legal in any of the countries where it's happening. But it's happening. But yeah, I mean, estimates are probably north of 27 million now, but that was 10 years ago. That was what we saw was 27 million slaves. 27 million slaves. That's more than the total of 400 years of the transatlantic slave trade.
So that's not even counting like in our own country, the things like that we don't automatically call slavery, like sex trafficking and things like that. That's where you're submitting to
those numbers are included in that.
Oh, are they? I'm sorry.
But there are certain lines that then don't get, and I don't know how that all gets tabulated, but there are folks who are essentially in that aren't officially
quote
in
unquote slaves, right?
But it just the thought that's I mean, we're still seeing in what we would think of as a literal sense in Africa, children being kidnapped in one country, taken to another country, and sold to work, picking coffee beans and cacao beans and things. As we see all these things that happen in the world, and that doesn't include some of the child labor stuff mm-hmm. that goes on in places like, China and so on and so forth. But Peter is literally saying, slaves, submit to your masters. Mm-hmm. Now, he's not talking about slavery, just like in this passage, he's not talking about marriage that's not the point. That's not here's the treatise on how to do marriage or how to handle being a slave. What he is saying is everything that we do as Christ followers, everything that we do, we need to display in our actions and our attitudes that we belong to Christ, not this world. And so the activity and the attitude that we put on film, I'm watching football, so as we're putting this out there.
Don't watch Notre Dame.
Or really any of my teams, although the Bears won, but anyway,
the defense won.
The Bears won the way the Bears have traditionally won, unfortunately. So as we put our lives out there and people see it, we need to be displaying the kingdom that we belong to, not the kingdom that we're in. Mm-hmm. So since we're here as aliens and strangers, as elect sojourners, as Pastor Matthew said when he was introducing it, that's why I chuckled, because I got a text from Ricky at their church. They were preaching 1 Peter. We're preaching 1 Peter. Courtney's church back in New Jersey is preaching 1 Peter. And they said, all of you are using this sojourners. Did you guys have a meeting or something? And anyway, that was kind of funny.
It's a good word.
It is a good word. The NIV doesn't use it in its translation, but I think it's a good one. And Pastor Matthew went through, why he felt that was the better translation of it. And so since he used it in our intro, I keep going back to it. But in any case, because we are just passing through, we're here on temporary assignment. I have a t-shirt I wore earlier in the week that my sister gave to me that said, "Heaven is my home. I'm just here recruiting." That's what we're here for. We're here to be ambassadors to represent God's kingdom. And we do that in the context of our everyday lives. So that means when we are talking about marriage, sexuality, family, when we're talking about parenting, when we're talking about our employment, when we're talking about our, whatever it is that we're doing, it's a gospel issue. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the problems, one of the weaknesses in the modern church is we very seldom see much of anything as a gospel issue unless it's actually word-based evangelism, right? If we're not at church or we're not speaking to someone with the intention of, hey, I'm going to tell them about Jesus, we don't look at the rest of life as gospel often enough. And if we took this approach that Peter's giving to us here, or that Paul puts forth, or that Jesus talks about, or even if you go back to the Old Testament, everything they did in Israel was to be centered on God. It was an act of worship. We spent a long time going through Numbers. And as we looked at Numbers, one of the first things that God did when he brought the people from Mount Sinai toward the promised land, as they began that big part of the journey, one of the first things that he did was he organized them around the tabernacle. So at the center of their existence, all of the tribes divided were facing toward the tabernacle as they camped, because every part of life was ordered around God. We don't tend to do that in our world the same way. We tend to think, okay, well, we've got church on Sunday, and we've got these other various spiritual activities, and maybe we pray before a meal. Although I notice increasingly that very many Christian families don't do that. We don't even have the tradition of sitting down to dinner a lot of the time, which is tradition, sure, but there's value in it, and we've moved away from so many of the traditions that we have failed very often to teach the things that make those traditions meaningful. Mm-hmm. And so prayer before meals, there's nowhere in Scripture that says you have to pray before your meal. However, everything is to be done with gratitude. And so before we eat, the reason that has been a Christian tradition is before we eat, we want to acknowledge who it is that is providing this for us. Very much like, if you serve me dinner, I'm going to thank you for it, right? So we need to recognize these things. When we approach marriage that way, it changes our whole perspective, mm-hmm. right? So for those who are not married, and particularly for those who have, who are young and still trying to figure this out, I have an 18-year-old daughter who is thinking or going to be thinking in that direction. My encouragement for everybody is choose wisely. Move, I want to say move judiciously. I don't necessarily want to say move slowly, although yes, but that gives the impression that I'm encouraging, marry later, wait till you're older to get married. And I honestly, this is me, not scripture. I think I think I can make a case for it from scripture, but this is not the command of God. I think the later we wait to get married, the harder it is because we have adult habits that we have to undo.
Sure.
But the problem we run into very often in choosing our mates is that, as I said before, marriage is for men and women. We know, we're wrestling with this now. It's not for men and men or women and women, which the fact that we're wrestling with that is historically new. But it's not for boys and girls, right? So the problem that we have in our society, and I suspect this is true in much of society around the globe, particularly in developed nations and in Western nations in particular, is we have delayed maturity. So where we used to see, teenagers thinking in terms of becoming adults, now we're delaying becoming adults as long as we possibly can. We don't want responsibility. We want to live with the so-called freedom. It's funny how that works. When we're a kid, we want the freedom of being, unleashed from our parents.
And when you step into adulthood, you're like, ooh.
Right. And so, we want to have this perpetual, college type experience where we have the late teenager kind of freedom and ability to do things without the responsibility of the consequences of that or actually growing up and doing things. And so when we have that approach, then marriage becomes very. But Daddy, I love all the
You're 16,
all the Disney princess things.
The older you get, the more you agree with Triton on that one.
Right. I mean, there's so much of that. And
I had
it's not just girls. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
I mean, guys are out there, saying, well, she's really attractive. So
this might be a slightly off topic, but I thought it was interesting. I was actually talking to Gabe about it on Sunday. My mom.
Gabe's never off topic.
Right. My mom for 30 plus years worked for a family law attorney. And she would say that two things about marriage in particular. Number one is the divorce rate always climbed after the holidays. And number two, she would see couples that were together, living together and everything for years and years and years and years, decades. And then they would get married and the relationship would end. Like they were married a year or two and then got divorced. And Gabe and I were talking about, he goes, yeah, I know several people that, they've been together for years and then they decide to get married and then the relationship fizzles out. And
First wedding I did for somebody outside of our family. This was back before we had real life and I was licensed through another church. Very first one, they had been living together, had a number of children together, and we did the wedding. To cut to the chase, I got a message from the courthouse that something wasn't right on the paperwork. So I had to go back and redo that and have them sign it. Couldn't get a hold of them. Finally tracked down one of the parents. I said, oh yeah, they split up. Like, it's been 30 days.
Yeah.
It's been 30 days and you've got kids together.
And you've been together this whole time.
It's crazy.
Why do you think that is?
I was going to ask you, why do you think that is?
I decay. Well, because I think that people now, one of the reasons, I feel like people are getting married just like that and not putting much thought into it because it's so easy. It's relatively easy to get a divorce, to end the whole thing, especially if you don't have children.
No-fault divorce has been just an absolute bane.
So people go into marriage not necessarily thinking it through or realizing the weight of it that they should, because it's if it doesn't work out, I can just go get a divorce. No big deal. And so I think that's part of it, but I don't know that I understand we've been together years and years. And then you have this quote unquote contract that you're married and now gonna end. But
I think the weight of marriage hits them. I think those things are related where, for the same reason that I've noticed that the divorce rate gets higher after the wedding,
Mm.
right? So for sure, people tend to get divorced more if they're married. And the statistics
Chew
still,
on that.
the
Yeah.
statistics are still tracking that.
Right.
So the divorce rate has come down in
Mm.
recent years.
But so is the
But
marriage
that's
rate.
because
Right.
people aren't getting married.
Right.
They're just living together, having kids together, buying houses together.
Right.
But we don't want to commit to marriage.
So I think that
there's a lot of craziness.
as much as we try to take God out of marriage,
yes,
you can't,
Right.
because you see things like this and you see people who have been in relationships for years and then they get married, and the reality of marriage is what it is,
Right.
whether you want to admit that or not. And then it doesn't work. It's when you're trying to do your own thing.
Well, and like you said, this without God in the marriage, we have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And from the Christian worldview, we recognize that's because marriage is designed, it's created by
Right.
God, for his purpose, so that it can be a picture of Christ and the church, of God and his relationship to his people. And so by God's common grace to all of us, you can have a really good marriage. I think it's harder today than it was in previous generations because we don't have the same character in our society as individuals. Before you ever get to marriage, we don't have the character that our grandparents had. Now, that, again, I'm talking about those who are not believers, marriage across the board in general, it can be good. And we've heard stories about the World War II couple that met on Thursday, got married on Saturday.
Right.
He ships out on Monday.
Right.
They don't see each other for 2 years.
And they're together for 60 years.
Right, exactly. But again, character was different then. Right. There was a different set of values in the society. No fault divorce did not exist at that time. So to get divorced, you had to go through a much more difficult and expensive process, although I don't know that it's cheap now. Nothing is.
It ain't.
Nothing is cheap. But you had to actually, sue for fault in
Right.
this, that there was a reason that you're dissolving this contract and someone was at fault. So, at worst, from my perspective, or at easiest, I should say, would be the irreconcilable differences sort of thing. But the concept that the society believed in at the time was that marriage is forever. And it takes something extreme to get out of it. And there was a stigma that goes along with it. We don't have that anymore. Right. You get in and get out, doesn't matter. Live together without being married, doesn't matter.
And then you can get married, 5, 6, 7 times.
Right, exactly. Or just forego it altogether.
Right.
And so you live in this pseudo marriage that isn't marriage and doesn't have the same weight to it. Ultimately, I believe what we're seeing, and again, I don't have a verse I can give you that says, okay, this is for sure what it is. But I think we can recognize it in the scriptures. It's a spiritual battle. Mm-hmm. The devil is going to, we know that his typical schemes are to mess up relationships. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, our relationship with God. He hates the Lord and therefore hates us. He wants to do anything he can to blaspheme God. Mm-hmm. Well, so the relationships that logically, if I were the devil, the logical attack would be church relationships, mm-hmm. family relationships. If I can divide these things that God has given us as gifts that are to shape us, that are primary tools of discipleship, that are primary reflections of our relationship with him, if we get that wrong and we can distort the image of who God is for the rest of the world, mm-hmm. well, that strategically, that's where I'm dropping the bombs if I'm the devil.
Well, I think even something that hits harder than just a couple that doesn't get married, but is a couple and living together. Something you said on Sunday struck me about being married and going back to kind of the slaves and masters talk. One of your points was submitting to your husband, even if he is an unbeliever. Mm. And I was like,
that's hard.
That is hard. And I was thinking about that, and I was talking about that. I'm not, currently married, but hypothetically, theoretically, if something like that were to happen in my life, I would have a very hard time with it. But I remember something you told me years ago. And it was, at the end of the day, you have to submit to your husband, but you always submit to the higher authority.
Mhm.
So whether your husband
Which is why you're submitting to your husband in the first place.
Right.
As a reflection of that.
But if your husband isn't doing what God says to do, you do what God says to do.
Right.
If he is,
which doesn't mean if I don't like what
right. But if he is trying to steer you or your family down a path that's the opposite of what God is saying to do, you submit to the higher authority. And that kind of made that idea a little bit clearer to me, in that, you don't just submit to your husband because what I say goes.
And there's so many ways that goes wrong.
Right. Sure. I can get that.
Everything from the overt, I forbid you to go to church kind of thing, which is, okay, this is kind of an obvious thing.
Right.
To there are things that are a little more subtle, like it's okay for you to be a Christian. It's okay to go to church, but I don't want you going to that Wednesday night Bible study.
Right.
Okay, well, the Bible doesn't command you to go to Wednesday night Bible study.
Right.
So now there's some wrestling to do with that. How can I best portray the image of the obedient church to the headship of Christ in this particular situation? So there are times that it might take a little bit more prudence, a little more wisdom to do it. But then there's also things, that we don't talk about. And I think this is a sad reality in the churches. We just don't talk about important but uncomfortable things enough. Mm-hmm. We live in a world that is inundated with pornography and vile sexuality. And so we have, unfortunately, within marriage, this message that really I don't think was being promoted the same way until the 70s, 60s, and 70s, especially the 70s, as things really kind of, what started in the 60s really kind of took off in the sexual revolution. But men demanding, degrading, what do I want to say here? Sexual practices that do not reflect the goodness, purity, and beauty that God intends for marriage. Mm-hmm. And so in the 70s, we started having people really pushing, and this, I think, became part of when people complain about toxic 90s purity culture, which I get really chagrined about, because that's kind of a, we're just going to drop bombs that don't have any real meaning. Right. But we started getting into too many people within so-called Christian circles saying, well, once you're married, all bets are off. Just don't have sex till you're married, and then do whatever. It's all good. Do it.
There are no rules.
And there's a certain element of truth to that, but there are also things that are innately a bad picture of God.
Well, that's what we talked about earlier. That's just taking the weight out of marriage. That's taking marriage lightly and not for what it's supposed to be.
Yes. And, there's, again, this is why, we could develop this subject for a long time.
Right. We got a couple minutes.
I mean, as far as the series goes, but we're going to do 2 weeks on it, because Peter's not trying to develop all of marriage.
Right.
What he is trying to say is whatever you do within your marriage, you need to do for the purpose of the gospel. So why are wives submitting to their husbands? In particular, why are they submitting to unbelieving husbands? Because through this behavior, through this conduct, through the purity and reverence of the way they conduct themselves, their goal is to win their husbands for Christ. Mm-hmm. So when your husband is a jerk, how would Christ handle that? Mm-hmm. When your unbelieving husband, whether he's a good man or a bad man, when he does things that don't reflect Christ, how do we then reflect Christ as wives? I'm not a wife, but you get what I'm saying. How does the wife then reflect Christ in such a way to be winsome? And as Peter says, to win him without words by the purity of the conduct. And, and some have said, well, I should never wear makeup. I should never try to be pretty for my husband, and so on and so forth, because he says, well, let your beauty come from inner beauty. Okay. He's not forbidding these things. Right. What he's saying is you need to be a picture of the beauty of Christ, right, which comes from within and is enduring. Beauty always fades. That's just for all of us. There's a physical prime for all of us, men and women alike. And then we're not in that prime. And if we're relying on that, that's why so many celebrities are working so hard, paying thousands upon thousands of dollars for surgeries that often make them look like lizards. I don't know.
Horrible.
But the idea is we're trying to keep that youth. We want to keep all that youthfulness in us. But if our focus is not there, if that's not our identity equation, is well, I'm young and beautiful and vibrant, so I'm going to pretend that it's my 29th birthday for the 18th time. I'm 72 years old, but I want to look like I'm 25. These kinds of things are ridiculous to begin with, but it's a cry from a deeper place.
Oh, sure.
And if we are viewing marriage through the lens of Christ, and again, everything that Peter's saying really only is suitable when we have the first relationship of our intimacy with Christ, then the rest of this works. If we don't have that, none of it works anyway. Right. So we can't try to say, well, we're just gonna take all these moral principles from the scriptures. That's not sufficient, because the moral principles are the outgrowth of being united to Christ, having that relationship with him. So when we're talking about all of these other aspects, the point has to always be, how can I reflect the wonder and beautiful nature of God? How can I declare the praises of the one who's called us out of darkness and into his wonderful light?
Okay. We will stop there for today. I'm sorry if I got us a little off topic with my questions and discussion points, but that's me.
That is the point. That's why we have the podcast. If we're just going to stay only on the points,
we just do the sermon again.
Right, just do the sermon.
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening.
I stay on topic all the time.
We will continue. Well, that's not true. As Rich said at the beginning, Dance Arts will be here, Imagine Worship, this Sunday. So if you want to check that out, we will live stream it on Sunday morning, and it will continue to be on our Facebook and YouTube pages.
So we won't have the sermon audio because there won't be a sermon.
So if you look for that on your podcast,
more of a hodgepodge. So.
Yeah, and then I don't know what we'll talk about next week.
Hopefully we can get Miss Sarah or Miss Emma.
Oh yeah, either one would be great. So yeah, check that out, and thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Farewell, YouTube. Hi, Jeremy.
Ciao.